The title of my papers has already been noted, is African Perspectives of the Sacredness of Nature and the Role of African Traditional Religions in the Preservation and the Protection of the Environment. Now, the paper discusses the role of African traditional religions in the conservation and protection of the environment. It is based on the concepts of the sacredness of nature as perceived in African traditional societies. It is argued that in the absence of a legal framework intended to protect the environment, African traditional religious beliefs play a major role in preserving and protecting the environment, whose sacredness is believed to emanate from God. The paper begins by defining the concept of the sacred as perceived in world religions generally and in African traditional religions in particular. Then it discusses African environmental crisis and finally examines the role of African traditional religions as effective means of protecting and preserving the ecosystem for the present and future generations. The concept of the sacred in world religions. The concept of the sacred has been discussed by various scholars over the years, mainly by historians of religion, anthropologists, sociologists, philosophers, theologians, and so on. Frederick Strength has indicated that etymologically, the word sacred comes from the Latin word "cessa," which means set off or restricted. In this regard, a person or something is designated sacred when it is unique or extraordinary. And another word which is related to cessa is numen, which means mysterious power or God. Nathan Soderblom, a prominent Swedish churchman and historian of religions, is credited to be one of the first scholars that attempted to define the term sacred. In 1913, Soderblom noted that holiness, which is synonymous to sacred, is central notion of religions, and that the distinction between sacred and the profane was basic to all religious life. Holiness is the great word in religion. It is even more essential than the notion of God, according to Soderblom. Real religion may exist without a definite conception of deity, but there is no religion without a distinction between holy and profane. Religion is the manner to which something is holy. Another scholar who analyzed the term sacred was Rudolfo Otto. In his analysis of religion, Otto concluded that the essence of religion is the numinous, that is the non-rational element in what is experienced in religion as the holy. From this word, Otto came up with an understanding of religion as a mysterium tremendum et fascinam et augustum. According to Otto, the numen is the holy other from the natural world. It occupies a class of its own, and on this account, the numinous is irreducible to any other thing. Emile Durkheim, in his Elementary Forms of Religious Life, he postulated that all religious beliefs make a classification of all things into two classes or opposite groups, generally designated by two distinct words, sacred and profane. This division of the world into two domains, the one containing all that is sacred, the other all that is profane, is the distinctive trait of religious thought. The two classes are radically excluded or opposed to each other. Durkheim held that sacred things are protected and isolated from the profane through prohibitions or taboos. These are applied in order to create and maintain a distance between the sacred and the profane. The two do not interact with one another. They are kept strictly separate. Another scholar, Talcott Parsons, also observed that sacred things are those that are set apart by a peculiar attitude of respect, which is expressed in various ways. Such things are imbued with particular virtues on the basis of which they have special powers. Consequently, contact with them is either particularly advantageous or particularly dangerous, or both. Leonard Bloom and Philip Zernick have also observed that the defining characteristic of religion is the creation of the sacred. When something is made sacred, it is invested with a special meaning and treated with reverence, awe, and respect. Having been invested or imputed with sacredness, such objects are perceived as different or wholly other from the everyday world to which proper respect is due. Now, when we look at these various descriptions or definitions of the sacred or sacredness, we find out that they have one thing in common. And this is that they all emphasize a hard border or separation between the sacred and the profane. So I have instilled three things. One, in the case of the sacred, it presents the pure state. It produces health, vigor, luck, fortune, and long life. The profane is characterized by weakness, illness, misfortune, and death. Between the two, there is a clear line of demarcation or division. Since the sacred is wholly other, it is protected with stringent prohibitions or taboos in order to keep it totally separated from mundane things found in nature. In other words, the two camps, one filled with sacred things and the other one with profane things, they have no way of interacting with one another. They are completely separate. But when we move into the African context of African traditional religion, Jacob Olupona has defined African traditional religions as those which sprout out of the African soil before the coming of Christianity and Islam. They are indigenous to Africa. Now they have their own understanding of the sacred, and their own forms of spirituality. The African perspectives of the sacredness of nature have the following characteristics. One, there is no clear and fixed line of demarcation between the sacred and the profane. Secondly, the sacredness is not imputed by human beings. It is believed that since God is the creator of the physical earth, then the various aspects of the universe are permeated with the senses of the sacred. Third, sacredness is inseparably bound with nature. in the same way in that human beings are defined by their connection to the totality of the community of life. In other words, people are connected with humanity, with the environment without much distinction. 4, every object in the universe is potentially sacramental. If we understand sacramental as referring to an external action or right or object that communicates God, or in which one encounters God. Number 5, one of the most interesting aspects of African concept of the sacred is the absence of the notion of holy other. African spirituality is not dualist or binary. This is because the spirit world is in constant interaction with the physical world. It is strongly believed that the physical world has meaning insofar as it stands in cordial relationship with the spiritual world. The spiritual world and the physical world are not enemies, but soulmates. Characteristic number 6 is that African perspective of sacredness is integrative. In this context, sacredness does not involve a complete withdrawal from the world of nature. They engage the world in its diverse secular activities, providing harmony, cohesion, order, and continuity. 7, African perspective of sacredness of nature is holistic. It is all-embracing. For the African, divinity and humanity are not seen in isolation. The sacred and the profane, the visible and invisible interact, and the divinity indwells our world. The world of the spirit participates in the human world. Another characteristic is that the nature and the environment bear the mark of goodness and godliness. The African worldview considers all aspects of life sacred. This is a fundamental principle for all Africans. The other characteristic is that sacredness in African traditional societies is communal. There is emphasis on the community. I am because we are. And the self is defined in the context of the community. In other words, the community comes first and the individual comes second. But this communality of humanity also involves the world of nature and how the social system interacts with the environmental system. But one of the most strongest connection between human beings and nature in Africa is the use of totems. Many African societies in Africa, they have totemic symbols, and these can be animals, plants, inanimate things, anything which has some kind of connection with the history of a tribal entity. So the emblems basically provide the identity of a particular group. A good example in Botswana, practically all ethnic groups have a totem in the form of an animal or so. Among the Bakwena, the crocodile is their totem. The Bangwatu, the Deka is their totem. The Bakatla, the Kabo is their totem. The Bahurusi, the Eland, the Pofu is their totem. And the Kalanga, they have the zebra. Other tribes, they have the fish as their totem. Now, as we speak today, Africa is faced with a lot of ecological destruction. In other words, the ecological crisis is not only global, but it is also African. Here I can give some examples of countries where there's a lot of environmental degradation going on. In the context of Kenya, it has been documented that there are a lot of rivers, thick forests, lakes, wild animals, and the aquatic life are being destroyed as a result of human involvement. Human beings throwing into the rivers waste, which now contaminates the water and eventually contaminates the life of the people. In Malawi, we are experiencing also environmental degradation, whereby a number of people cut trees, and this is now creating a lot of drought, erosion, but all of this because of poverty. And this destruction of the environment is going on unabated. A similar example can be taken from Nigeria, where people are experiencing air pollution, intensive grazing, and a number of other aspects of environmental degradation. We can also mention South Africa as a case in point. We can also mention Angola as a case in point. We can also mention Ghana as a case in point. And here in Botswana, where I live, we are also faced with a lot of environmental issues. These include poor land management, deforestation, and also a lot of animals being killed and other parts of the country being developed, but much to the detriment of the environment itself. We also have examples from Zimbabwe, where environmental degradation has also been recorded. So this is basically the general situation as we speak, that because of the idea of wanting to achieve development like other societies or countries in the world, many people are tampering with the environment itself by killing animals through hunting or deforestation, which is causing soil erosion and so forth and so forth. So now, when it comes to the issue of how African traditional religions help to protect the environment, the argument I am making is that in traditional societies, we don't have legal frameworks. We don't have written documents which are intended to protect the environment, air, trees, forests, animals, and so on. In which case, African traditional beliefs play the role of preventing people from destroying nature, because the understanding is that if you destroy nature, you are basically destroying yourself, because from a spiritual, theological perspective, every human being in society is connected to the environment, and people are able to have fullness of life for as long as you take care of these environmental issues. I would like to give also a few examples in Africa where we see African traditional religious beliefs protecting and preserving nature. If we go to Guinea in West Africa, this particular country has a lot of wetland, a lot of lakes and rivers and so on. And in most cases, people are not allowed to just go and start fishing or killing animals. And we have here a good example of a lagoon called the Wasaya Lagoon. In that particular lagoon, or a little bit lake of a lake, you are not allowed to go and fish the way you want. And basically the fishing season begins with a religious ceremony in May, and it closes with a religious ceremony in October. So when it is closed, you are not supposed to go and fish or even hunt around this particular lake. All of these tend to preserve nature. We also have another example from Ivory Coast. There is another lagoon or lake when these religious observances are also performed. In Kenya, we have, among the Maasai people of Kenya, there are also some sacred forests which are protected because the Maasai think that the forests form the basis of their livelihood and spirituality. And they go normally to these forests to make offerings of something, could be beer, in order to appease the ancestors. But at the same time, the forest become a temple, a sacred place for worship to the supreme God. Similar examples are drawn from Ghana also, where there are certain forests where people are not allowed to go and do hunting or cutting trees for firewood. So these are good examples of how religious beliefs protect nature through these taboos or prohibitions, under the understanding that if you break these taboos, then you can be subjected to illness and ultimately you can die. Here in Botswana, we also have a lot of examples among the various tribes that live in Botswana, the Bakatla, the Bamalete, the Bangwatu, where they consider certain trees are sacred, as sacred. They are considered as female trees. And because of that particular special position, they looked upon as symbols of fertility or sources of life. So if such trees are cut without proper consideration, it can cause drought, and then a number of people are likely to die. In the same way, there are some animals like the giraffe, the buffalo, the python, the eland, the James Bock, which are not supposed to be killed as such. Among the Shona in Zimbabwe, we have similar examples where certain mountains, forests, and trees are considered sacred. And in such areas, people go to make offerings to God, of course, through the ancestors, for purposes of having rain. In Malawi, where I come from, we also have a number of forests. One of these, which I personally visited in the 1980s, is called Mponda Forest. This is a very secluded area. In that particular forest, when there is drought, the traditional rainmakers with the community, they go in there to make offerings, hoping that God will respond by sending rain. And in that particular context, people are not allowed to cut firewood or to remove any vegetation to take it to the village. because the fear is that such action is going to desecrate the forest. People are not allowed to go there to hunt animals or to do anything that can spoil the environment as such. So these are just few examples found in a number of countries in Africa, where African traditional religions really play a very important role in the preservation and the protection of the environment. I have observed that in the context of Malawi, if you go to areas which are predominantly traditional, you find that the forests are intact. People don't just go into the forest to kite firewood because the chiefs or traditional leaders, they are going to punish anybody who would do that. So we all follow what they tell us to do. But when you go into urban areas where you find laws codified in books, people go around to cut trees because there are no religious sanctions to say, if you do this, you are going to die. You might possibly be arrested by the police and then be released tomorrow morning. But if you are accused by the ancestral spirit, or if you displease God, then you can't do anything. You are at the mercy of God, and eventually you can suffer through disease, or eventually you can die. In the conclusion, I just wanted to emphasize that African traditional religions are not necessarily primitive or archaic. They are their own special way of believing, of practicing, of doing things. And we feel that in Africa, they have made a great deal of contribution in terms of preserving the environment. Otherwise, we would have lost quite a lot of things in terms of forests, trees, animals, and so on and so on. So that is basically my argument in this presentation. Thank you very much, Chair.